Hey, Monarch Kids, this is Miss Kurganin, and I am going to lead you through your note catcher for industrial regions, Weber's theory of industry and job sectors. And then when we're done with this, we're going to talk about site situation factors. I'm recording this because this is a lot of heavy information, and it's easier if I record it, and that way you can stop me to write down on your note catcher. So we're going to first go through industrial regions, and this is all part of chapter 11. So at the very top of your note catcher, you are going to write down Europe, North America, and East Asia. These are three regions of industrial concentration, or in other words, where does our stuff come from? Then in this next map, I'll pull a little PowerPoint here. Let's look at Europe. So in the 1800s, this is basically where our industrial revolution happened and then kind of spread to the United States. So you would write UK. Back in the 1800s, they were steel and textiles, but they've been moving towards high tech in the 20th century. You are going to write down 4 different regions for Europe. So along the sidebar of your note catcher, which looks like this, sorry. All right, like this. So you're writing down right around in here. Okay, let me go back. So for our industrial regions, let me keep going on that one. You are going to write down the UK is where our industrial revolution started, and then it spread into high tech. Germany and Belgium, they also in the 1800s, they were messing around with iron and steel, but they've been moving towards cars. Like if you think of European cars, that's really what they're noted for, and pharmaceutical medicines and stuff. Why are those industries springing up there? They're really close to the markets. This is a densely populated part of the world, and so that is helpful in selling those industries to their markets. Northern Italy. Northern Italy in the 1800s and even in the 20th century has been known for textiles, so where our cloth and clothes come from. And if you think about a lot of like even fashion industry starts in Milan and then eventually diffuses out through Europe. So Northern Italy has always been known for textiles. And Spain, Northeast Spain, you would write down that in the 1800s, they actually were not known for really anything. And then there was this boom in the 20th century where they started to produce textiles and cars. And the book would have you know that Spain is one of the fastest growing regions. And when you look at where it's located, it's so close to the African continent that this is where a lot of immigration is happening into those jobs available in Spain. So these industrial regions to compare with Eastern Europe and North America. So Russia in the 1800s was not really known for any major industry. And then came communism, and communism imposed upon the people, kind of mobilized that workforce into factories. And they are now known for exploiting the resources here of petroleum, mining, coal. And that actually is creating a lot of conflict here in Ukraine right now because the natural gas, Ukraine is trying to control those markets, but Russia still wants to control those markets, so is controlling Ukraine's political affairs, even though they're an autonomous nation. Russia's super resource rich, so the more that they mobilize their workforce, the more profitable they're going to be. Then let's look at the North America. So the history of our country in the 1800s. So if you think about even like where our population, our colonists started up in this region, we originally were making textiles, so cotton clothing. A lot of the cotton was grown down here in the South. And then up here in the Northeast is where we had factories available to make those textiles. And that's what helped the United States become very wealthy, was our textile exports. We also, though, recognized that we had a lot of iron ore and coal, and so you need iron ore to make steel. So this is also where we started to create heavy manufacturing. So in the 20th century, it's been very steel focused. This is our oldest industrial region. But the next place that you're going to write down here is in the mid-Atlantic. So what's in the mid-Atlantic? Like, think about New York. New York is still, to this day, known for foreign trade and finance. Like, the reason that the Twin Towers were hit with 9/11 is that was a symbol of American finance and banking and stock trading in the world. So this is where a lot of our high tech comes from. But I think that's funny. In the 19th century, we in the 1800s, we were mostly farming in this region, and then we just went bananas with our foreign trade and our finance. This is also our most populated region, industrial region. But then you'll hear in the book and in this course the term Rust Belt. Rust Belt, like when you think of what gets rusty, well, metal gets rusty. And this area up here, Michigan and Wisconsin, this area, is known as the Rust Belt because not only is this where steel can be produced, but if heavy steel can be produced here, why don't you have your automobile industry right here? The idea of proximity is what's going to lead us into talking about Weber's theory. And this allows us to make our vehicles and even our airplanes here. This is our steel area. Okay, but then Southern California has lately been on the map as an industrial area for our United States. And what their advantage is they're so close to workers. There's so many people immigrating here to work these jobs that in the 1800s, they weren't particularly known for industry, but now this is one of the fastest growing places to produce aircraft, textiles, and then tons of food. Like, this is really where the majority of the food that feeds our nation comes from, which you learned about in chapter 10. And then China, your last map has you note Beijing, Hong Kong, Shanghai. These are China's industrial centers. In the 1800s, they were still primary farming, but now they produce almost everything. So very similar to Russia, as communism was imposed on the Chinese people, the government took and mobilized that workforce into factories to move their development in the world. And then Japan, similarly in the 1800s, was not particularly noted for industry. And then its government mobilized its people into factories, and now they're really one of the leading countries that is cutting edge for electronics. And then they also found ways to make very fuel efficient cars, which were super popular in the 1970s in the United States, and then has helped motivate our industry. I'm going to pause here for a second. So the next part of your note packet are job sectors. And we're going to have four different kind of categories where jobs fit in. And they include the primary sector, the secondary, the tertiary. And then I know that that's kind of a funky term, but quaternary means like fourth. So let's look first at what is the primary sector. And I'm going to go to this part of it. So what you're going to do in your notes is write down what is it and what are examples of those types of jobs. So primary jobs, you would write down in your notes, are activities that directly extract or harvest resources from the earth. So you have fish and you are a fisherman or fisher person. There are logs and you are a logger. There's minerals and you are a miner. So you are directly interacting with the resources and pulling them from the planet. So you have direct connection to the earth. There's wheat and you are a farmer. So primary sectors, that is a high labor intensive sector part of the economy. You need lots of people to do that if you don't have the money for machinery. Like if you look at the breakdown for the African continent has the majority of its people in the primary sector, where if you look down where tertiary is, the North American continent only has 4% of its population involved in primary activities. So, in this sector of the economy, you are actively working and spending your day mining or fishing or farming. Those are all examples of those jobs. But then the next sector, if you were to take those raw materials and add value to them by adding value, like you've got wood, but now you're going to make it a chair, or you've got a rough diamond and you're going to make it a ring, or you've got some cows and you're going to make a hamburger. That is called the secondary sector. It's activity that transforms raw materials, is what you're going to write down. Transforms the raw materials. And in doing that, you add value. So the raw materials here, wheat, you're going to make bread, or minerals, you're going to make diamond rings, and wood, you're going to make furniture. This is often done in factories. So in your notes, would you write down factories? And where is this happening? Secondary sectors? Pretty much anywhere that when you see the labels where it says like made in China, made in Vietnam, made in Mexico, these are regions of the world that are actively involved in the secondary sector, and their population is in factories making the stuff. Next sector is tertiary, which means like third. So the tertiary sector is going to be the connector. So you are the middle person. I was about to say middleman, but I'm trying not to be gender specific. You're taking the primary sectors and you're connecting them to the secondary sectors, and then you are creating the business that allows for that industry. So there's textile cloth in India, and there's the textile mills in India or in Italy, and then you are Abercrombie with the store in the mall. So the tertiary sector, you are linking primary and secondary sectors together to create the business for the products. So you're selling the goods, you're performing the services, and your involvement is the management. You are managing, you're not directly the miner. You're not even putting it together. You're the one that's selling stuff. So your industry needs to be located where people have the money to buy that stuff. So tertiary sectors are often in developed countries, populated regions, places where people have the cash to buy the products, and definitely in places where there's consumerism and capitalism, even, that you are the gaining profit from the buying and selling of these goods, right? The last sector in your notes is called the quaternary. And quaternary sector means that you are analyzing these business systems with technology, and you're looking to see where is going to be the next great market for that product. So, let's say Kanye makes some additional shoes, that are even, I don't know, uglier than those Yeezys. So you could then have a market analysis and try and figure out where would Kanye sell his shoes. Quaternary sector also deals in politics, like where are people going to vote for that candidate? So it involves computer systems, looking at markets, looking at information to either increase your production or decrease your production. So where are the places that are involved in quaternary market analysis? There's really only a few regions of the world, and they're the highest developed places on the planet. So North America, like when we think of like New York, is definitely operating out of quaternary systems. London, Japan, these are places that need to use computers to analyze markets. So examples of tertiary jobs, any like King Soopers, Walgreens, anybody who provides services, even doctors provide a service because you are sick and then they're trying to fix you. But then high tech, like, I guess doctors that would be at like the Mayo Clinic trying to analyze your cancer data, that's going to be research based. All right, now next I'm just going to show you a graph here because I think that this is kind of interesting, that as a country develops, then they become farther along in these sectors. Now, why is this not working right here? Here we go. All right, so notice that primary jobs, the more industrialized you become, like, when you look back at your breakdown, the African continent has so many people involved in the primary sector, but by the time they're super developed, like the United States and North America, they're not going to have as many, they're not going to have the need because they'll have large machines doing that work. Secondary sectors, you don't have a lot of need for them in pre-industrial societies, but as you build all of those factories and machines, the people are doing them, except when they start to level off. And this is what's happening in the United States. We used to have a lot of people involved in factories, but increasingly computers are doing that work. And so we don't have the need for the secondary workforce. So they're displaced, and that's rough. Tertiary, I mean, it wouldn't do any good to have, I don't know, a car dealership in a place that doesn't even use car transportation or have even roads. So tertiary jobs seem to be focused more on developed industrial nations than in pre-industrial. I mean, it would be silly to have a Walgreens available in, I don't know, like Ethiopia, because people don't have even the money to buy those, I don't know, dog toys. So the tertiary and that consumer spending happens more in developed countries. And then lastly, quaternary, the more industrial you become, the more you are dependent upon computer technology. But again, wouldn't make sense to have an Apple store here in, I don't know, Peru, because Peru is really focused in primary jobs. So this last part of your notes, you guys, is involved with Albert Weber or Weber's theory of industrial location. And at the top of your note sheet, so I've reviewed what are primary, secondary, tertiary, and quaternary jobs. But you are going to write down what are the trends in the United States. So over the last 50 years, there's been a trend where I showed you that industrial region up in the Northeast, and it's actually moving down south and west. Like think about Phoenix or Houston that are just going bananas with their population. That's where industry has been moving. So they're moving down south. Our steel, our textiles, our furniture are all moving down there. And that's increasingly where unions are more powerful. So the industry is shifting from the Northeast to the South and West. For Europe, the shift is moving to the South and East because of cheap labor. So it used to be much more in Western Europe, and now it's moving down into Central Europe, where they can capitalize on immigrants and cheap labor. The third topic down there, it says a maquiladora. What is a maquiladora? So, and I've already showed you this. A maquiladora, right along our border, is where we have these assembly factories. And we, as American business people, place our factories right over the border because we don't have to pay minimum wage. So like I think about like Victoria's Secret, that was like big in the 90s and 2000s with, all those bras with stuffing in them to make, I don't know, your boobs look bigger. So all of the Victoria's Secret factories were right across the border because then you could make those bras, and Victoria's Secret could, still sell them at a profit, but they didn't have to pay the workforce very much. This doesn't particularly take a lot of skill to assemble things together, which is why a lot of like our microwaves, our televisions, our even our automobiles increasingly are being pieced together and assembled to minimize labor costs right on the edge of the border. So that's called a maquiladora. And there's about 11,500 such factories along our border between the United States and Mexico. People work about 60 to 70 hours a week, and they're only getting about, it sounds horrible, but like almost like $6 a day. And most of the workers are women. And it employs about 2 million people from Mexico. All right, so let's talk about Alfred Weber, and the least cost theory. So he analyzed markets and industry to try and figure out what's going to be kind of similar to von Thunen, what's going to be the most profitable place to put your factory. And there were 3 factors that he had to consider. So I want you to write down in your notes the 3 factors that he needs to consider are transportation costs, labor costs, and raw material. So he wants to make the transportation somewhat equal to the markets. He doesn't want to have to drive too far for transportation. For the labor costs, he wants to put the factory as close to a high population of labor as he could. And then he also wants to consider my raw materials and where am I going to get the stuff to make my product. And if I can somewhat triangulate with vectors, the market and the source of my labor and materials, I can get the perfect place to put my factory. So here's my market. I'm thinking about New York. Here is my source of raw materials. So this is where my iron ore is located up in like Michigan. Here is my source of labor, which I have a lot of people that could work in those factories in Pennsylvania. So maybe my vectors would meet right at a place in between like Illinois and New York, and that's going to be my ideal place for my factory. So I'm trying to find the ideal location for profit. And what's involved in this is the idea of weight. Because if my product is really heavy and I'm far away, that's going to be really expensive, again, like von Thunen, to bring that to market. So I want the heavy stuff as close to market as possible. If it's really light, well, then I could have it a little farther away. So his generalizations, and then this is the next part of your worksheet, is that the market location is going to be dictated by the weight, and you need to be close to your sources, what goes into it, and to your labor. And that's going to help determine where is your factory going to be. So for labor costs, you need to choose a place that you are going to have the most inexpensive labor possible. So, if I showed you just now that maquiladora, that's a way that we can get around paying minimum wage by having those factories right across the border. But we have to think also with weight, like we still have to have the transportation of that material across the border into markets. So that's why that seems to be really efficient there right across the border is high population areas like around Los Angeles would utilize those materials. So this is called the idea of bulk reducing or bulk gaining. So here I have my markets and I'm thinking about transportation. I'm trying to think about that raw material. And is it going to be heavier once I make it, or is it going to be lighter? So think about like paper. Paper starts out with trees, which are super heavy, but then ends up paper that's lighter. So I should probably have my factory closer to the trees because then I can transport the paper and that's really quite light to bring to market. For steel, steel's really heavy, and so are the cars that you make it. So you might want to have that as close to the market as possible because that's going to be really heavy to ship. So the idea of market oriented is you are trying to save on transportation costs. And you have to think about, is it going to be bulk gaining or bulk reducing? And what is what's called the break of bulk? So write down break of bulk in your notes. And break of bulk means that there is going to be some type of transportation shift. So if you're moving the raw materials, think about large machinery that has to pull that up and then put it on the truck and then move that to the next point. That's called a break of bulk. And so there's costs that are involved in changing that delivery mechanism. And the cheapest type of transportation is shipping, because like you don't have to use gas for that. It's a little more expensive to be on trucks, and then it is most expensive to use airplane shipping. Oh my gosh, like that's super expensive to have. It would have to be really light to be able to put it on a plane and ship it to the market. So the idea of break of bulk is, what are you taking off in your transportation and then assembling it, or you're putting it back into another mode of transportation? So in trying to figure out what's going to be your best place for industry, is it going to be, here, I'm going to pause. All right, so again, the break of bulk, the definition of break of bulk is the location between sources of raw materials and markets. And it's where you are trying to figure out, like, where are you going to be moving your material from rails to trucks, from ships to trucks, from ports to the transportation pipeline. I went to the Chapter 11 PowerPoint for this last part to show the difference between bulk gaining and bulk reducing industries. So bulk gaining, the production of the product is going to gain in weight. So think about like down by Golden is where the Coors Brewery is. And that actually used to be a super famous brewery because you couldn't take beer outside of state limits. And so all of the Coors was only produced there, and you had to come to Colorado to even have Coors. So there was some dorky movies back in the 80s, like Smokey and the Bandit, where they're like stealing Coors to bring it to other states in the country. I know, super, super silly, because if you've ever had Coors, it's not very good beer. I mean, sorry, but it's not. So, but the whole idea of the proximity to markets is that you are making the Coors right by that Rocky Mountain spring water, because it's going to get heavier and you need to have it close enough to Denver so that your heavy bulk gaining product is going to be right where people can drink it. If you've been up in Fort Collins, that's where the Anheuser-Busch beer factory is. We've got our Coors, and you can see that a lot of like the beer factories are near heavy populated places. So that's bulk gaining. Okay. Then there's bulk reducing. And bulk reducing, and again, perishable products should be also super close to the market. That's kind of like the idea of von Thunen. And then let me see if I can get to bulk. Hang on. I had to dig around and find this PowerPoint for bulk reducing. So they often use that copper mining as an example. So, because just mining in general is really labor intensive and it's heavy. Think about big chunks of land that you're digging up out of the ground. And so the end product, though, the copper, is much lighter, and that you would be able to transport more easily. So they have the copper industry located like right near the mining source, as do they have the cars near the sources of steel. Now you would say, no, wait a minute, cars aren't bulk reducing because you have the heavy steel and all of that, and then you have a heavy car, but the car can like drive to the market. Like you can have that car and then you can kind of drive it onto those big trucks and then drive those trucks to market, and then you're still minimizing your transportation costs. All right. So I think that was everything I needed to show you for Weber. that it's market oriented, that you're trying to focus on the most efficient use of transportation and weight. But now you're going to come back to the main call because we're going to review job sectors together, and then I'm going to tell you about the site situation challenge. So come back to the call.